Clara avoided Elias for days after his proposal. She went about her tasks as if nothing had changed, teaching Samuel his letters, braiding Rose's hair in the mornings, preparing meals, but beneath her steady hands her heart was in turmoil. Whenever she caught Elias's gaze across the supper table, she looked quickly away. When his voice rumbled through the halls, she made excuses to busy herself in another room. The children noticed, though they did not understand. Samuel grew restless, sharp in his answers. Rose grew clingier, sensing unease but unable to name. At night, Clara lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Elias's words returned to her again and again. Need brought you here. But want keeps me asking you now. Did he truly mean it? Or was he convincing himself as much as her? A cruel voice whispered in her mind, You will never be enough. You are not Margaret. You cannot give him what she did. You cannot give him more children. You are only filling a void until he realizes the truth. It hurt because it felt possible. Too many years of being judged for what her body could not give had carved doubt deep into her soul. Then came the day that changed everything. It was a stormy afternoon. Rain sweeping across the ranch in furious sheets. Elias had gone into town for supplies, leaving Clara with the children. She had just set a pot of stew over the fire when Samuel burst into the kitchen, his face pale. Rose, he shouted. She's gone outside. She was chasing the dog. Clara's heart dropped. Without a word, she snatched a shawl from its peg and ran out into the storm. The wind howled, tearing at her skirts, and the rain soaked her in seconds. Rose! She cried, her voice nearly lost in the roar of thunder. She searched the yard, the barn, the orchard, nothing. Panic clawed at her chest as she stumbled toward the creek that ran along the edge of the property. Its waters, usually calm, were swollen and wild with the downpour. And there, at the bank, she saw her. Rose stood frozen, the dog barking frantically beside her. The child's little boots slipped dangerously close to the rushing current. Clara didn't think she ran, her shoes sinking into mud, her shawl whipping behind her. Rose, she shouted. Don't move, darling, I'm coming. The girl turned, her eyes wide with fear. Just as the ground beneath her gave way, Clara lunged, catching Rose's small arm before the water could claim her. The force of it nearly pulled them both in, but Clara dug her heels into the sodden earth, clutching the child with all her strength. Inch by inch, she pulled them back to safety, her muscles straining, her heart hammering, when they finally collapsed. On the wet grass, Clara gathered Rose into her arms, rocking her as the child sobbed against her neck. It's all right, sweetheart, Clara whispered, her tears mingling with the rain. I've got you. I'll always have you. By the time Elias returned, both Clara and Rose were inside, wrapped in blankets by the fire. Samuel explained in a rush what had happened, his words tumbling over each other in panic. Elias's face drained of color. He strode across the room, kneeling beside Clara where she held Rose close. God above. He breathed, brushing the child's damp hair from her forehead before looking at Clara. His voice broke on the words. You saved her, you saved my little girl. Clara met his gaze, and in it she saw raw fear, fierce gratitude, and something deeper, something he had not yet spoken aloud but could no longer hide. For the first time, she allowed herself to truly feel it. She belonged here, not as a replacement, not as a stopgap. She was already part of this family in every way that mattered. That night, when the children were asleep, Elias found her on the porch, her shawl draped loosely around her shoulders. He stood in silence beside her for a long while. The storm, now only a distant rumble on the horizon. You asked me, Clara said at last, her voice soft but steady, if I would walk forward with you. I was afraid of what people would say, afraid I could never be enough. But when Rose nearly slipped away today, I realized something. Elias turned to her, waiting. I already love them as my own, she confessed, her voice trembling. And I already love you. That frightens me more than anything, but it's the truth. Elias's chest rose with a deep breath, as though a burden had lifted from him. Slowly he reached for her hand, his fingers warm and sure around hers. Then, let the rest of the world talk, he said quietly. What matters is right here. And for the first time since the day she had set foot on his ranch, Clara allowed herself to believe it. The weeks that followed the storm carried with them a quiet change, like the turning of a season. The air on the Turner ranch seemed lighter. Somehow, the rooms warmer, the silences less heavy. Clara moved through the household no longer as a guest or temporary caretaker, but with a certainty she had not allowed herself before. The children felt it too.
Rose trailed after Clara with a devotion that only deepened, slipping her small hand into Clara's without hesitation.
Samuel, though still full of mischief and questions, began to soften around her, listening more, watching her with the trust he had once reserved only for his father and Elias. Elias no longer danced around his feelings. His gazes lingered openly, his words carried tenderness even in their simplicity, and whenever his hand brushed Clara's, he did not pull away. There was no more need for pretense, but still, the town was watching. Whispers continued in the pews on Sunday mornings. In the aisles of the mercantile, on the steps of the schoolhouse, the barren midwife. The widower rancher, a house built on pity, not love. Clara braced herself for those stares each time she walked through town. Yet, where once they pierced her, now they only skimmed the surface. Because each time she returned to the ranch, to the children's laughter and Elias's steady presence, she was reminded of what was real. It was Elias who put an end to the gossip at last. One crisp winter morning, he hitched the wagon and announced, in that matter-of-fact tone of his, "We're going to town." Clara frowned, adjusting her shawl. "All of us?" "All of us," he confirmed. "The children, too. It's time." By the time they arrived, curious eyes followed their wagon, whispers chasing behind them. Elias ignored them all. He led his family, because that was what they were, whether declared or not, straight to the small church at the center of Willow Creek. Inside, Pastor Whitaker looked up in surprise. "Elias Turner, Miss Clara." Elias's voice was steady, carrying across the quiet sanctuary. "Pastor, I've come to marry this woman, today, if she have me." The words struck Clara like sunlight breaking through clouds. She turned to Elias, her heart pounding. His expression was calm, but his eyes held a plea that reached straight into her soul. "I won't give the town another season to wag their tongues," he said. "You belong with us, Clara, with me, and I'll not wait another day to make it." Known. Tears blurred her vision. For years she had imagined what such a moment might look like. Who would ask? What words would be spoken? Whether love or duty would drive them? And here was Elias, his strength wrapped not in grand speeches but in simple truth, offering her not a life of convenience but of love. "Yes," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Yes, Elias, I'll have you." The ceremony was simple, witnessed only by Samuel, Rose, and the pastor. Yet it was more sacred than any grand wedding Clara had ever attended. Rose giggled as she clutched a small posy of winter flowers. Samuel stood tall, trying to look grown. And Elias held Clara's hands as though they were the most precious gift he had ever been given. When Pastor Whitaker declared them husband and wife, Elias bent and kissed her, gentle, reverent, but filled with a promise that shook Clara's very bones. Later, as they rode back to the ranch, Rose fell asleep in Clara's lap, Samuel leaning against Elias's side. The sun broke through the clouds, casting golden light over the land, and Clara looked out over the fields with tears in her eyes. She had delivered countless children into the world, watching families embrace new beginnings with joy she had thought forever out of reach for herself. But now she understood something profound. Motherhood was not defined by birth alone. It was written in sacrifice and love freely given, in the choice to stand and protect. That night, as the fire crackled and the children dozed, Elias reached for her hand. "We're a family now, Clara," he murmured. She squeezed his fingers, her heart full to bursting. "We always were," she whispered back, and for the first time in her life, Clara felt whole. Not the midwife who delivered children for everyone, but herself. Not the woman the town scorned for her empty womb, but a wife, a mother, a woman cherished, a woman finally home. By midsummer, whispers had spread like wildfire through Willow Creek. At first, it was only speculation, a raised brow when Clara was spotted riding out to the Turner ranch. a murmur when she lingered too long in the company of Elias's children. But gossip is like dry grass in the wind. Once sparked, it grows quickly until the whole town seems to hum with it. Clara felt it most on Sundays. She had always sat alone at the back of the church, unnoticed save for a polite nod of gratitude from the preacher. But now she felt eyes on her as she slipped quietly into the pew. Husbands whispered to their wives. Women covered their mouths, with handkerchiefs pretending to cough while they spoke behind them. Even the younger girls stole glances, curious and bold. When the preacher gave his sermon on purity of heart and the sanctity of marriage, Clara felt the weight of every word, pressing against her chest. No one said her name aloud, but she could hear it in their silence. The barren midwife has moved into the rancher's home. What could that mean? At the market, the whispers grew bolder. One afternoon, as Clara purchased flour, she overheard two women behind her. Elias Turner took her in, can you imagine? Not even a year since Margaret's death. She's clever, that one. Couldn't have children of her own, so she found a way to claim someone else's. Their laughter stung, worse than any insult. Clara kept her face calm, thanked the shopkeeper, and walked out without a word. But once outside, her hands trembled so fiercely she nearly dropped her parcel. The cruelest cut came from women she had once helped. Mothers whose lives she had saved in childbirth now turned cold when she passed. They still called for her when a baby was on the way, because her skill was unmatched, but their gratitude no longer stretched beyond the threshold. As soon as the work was done, their eyes cooled, their mouths thinned, and she knew exactly what they were thinking. She's overstepped her place. Clara tried to ignore it, tried to focus on the children who greeted her each morning with unguarded joy, but whispers have a way of seeping into even the strongest heart. At night she lay awake wondering if she had made a terrible mistake. She had told herself she came to help, to give Samuel and Rose what they needed. But had she also come because she wanted too much for herself? One evening, the gossip reached the ranch itself. Samuel, red-faced with anger, burst through the door after running home from town. "Tommy Jenkins says people are calling you Pa's new wife," he shouted, his small fists clenched. "He says Rose and me don't even remember Ma anymore." "That's not true, Miss Clara. I told him it's not true." Rose, frightened by her brother's shouting, burst into tears. Clara knelt quickly, drawing the children into her arms, but her heart ached with a sharp, familiar pain. The cruelty of adults had spilled into the mouths of children. That night, when the children were finally asleep, Clara found Elias on the porch, staring out at the darkened pasture. His jaw was tight, his shoulders rigid. She knew at once he had heard whispers too. "They've begun to talk," Clara said quietly. Folding her hands before her, Elias's eyes flicked toward her. "Let them—" "You don't understand," she pressed, her voice trembling despite herself. "They don't see me as someone helping you, Elias. They see me as a woman who has no shame, who's trying to take what belonged to Margaret." His face darkened. "Margaret's gone. No whisper changes that. And what you've done for Samuel and Rose, no one has the right to twist it into something ugly. But they will," Clara said softly. "They already have." Silence fell between them, broken only by the distant lowing of cattle. Clara's chest tightened. She had endured whispers all her life, but this was different. This time the gossip touched not only her but the children too. For a long moment Elias said nothing. Then he turned to her fully, his voice firm, unyielding. "I don't give a damn what this town thinks," he said. "You've given my children laughter again. You've given them comfort. And if people choose to spit venom at that, let them choke on it. You will not walk away because of gossip." Clara's breath caught. His words burned with a conviction that both steadied and unsettled her. For the first time she saw in him not just a grieving man, but one willing to stand beside her against the weight of the town. Yet, even as relief fluttered in her chest, a dangerous thought crept in, unbidden and impossible to ignore. If he would defend her this fiercely, what else might he feel for her? The scandal that rippled through Willow Creek might have been enough to drive another woman away, but Clara stayed. She stayed for Samuel, who had begun to smile again when he helped with chores at her side. She stayed for Rose, who reached for her hand at every step, as though afraid she would vanish if she let go. And though she hardly dared admit it to herself, she stayed because of Elias. The gossip hadn't stopped, but Elias's fierce defense of her that night on the porch had planted something dangerous in her heart, a seed of possibility, a whisper of belonging. She pushed it down each morning, reminding herself she was only here for the children. But when Elias's eyes lingered on her across the supper table, or when his hand brushed hers as he passed her a dish, her resolve faltered. It was on a cool autumn evening that everything changed. The harvest moon rose over the Turner Ranch, painting the fields in silver light. The children had long since gone to bed, worn out from gathering apples in the orchard. Clara sat by the hearth, darning one of Samuel's socks, while Elias lingered nearby, sharpening his knife with slow, deliberate strokes. The room was quiet, but not uncomfortable. For weeks now their quarrels had softened, replaced by small gestures of respect, Elias listening when Clara spoke of lessons for the children, Clara trusting his judgment in matters of the ranch. They were still different, still stubborn, but they had begun to find a rhythm. It was Elias who broke the silence. "Clara," he said, setting the knife aside. His voice was low, steady, but there was a weight behind it that drew her gaze to his. "I've been turning something over in my mind." Clara's fingers stilled on the sock. "Oh?" He leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees. The firelight carved shadows across his face, deepening the lines grief had left there. Yet beneath them, something new flickered, something more, alive than she had seen in months. "You've given my children back what I thought they'd lost forever," he began. "Laughter, safety, a woman's care. I can't imagine this house without you anymore." Her breath caught. She tried to keep her eyes on the sock in her lap, but her hands trembled, the needle slipping from her grasp. "Elias," she whispered, already sensing where his words were leading. "I need you to stay," he said simply. Then, after a pause, his voice roughened. "Not just as their caretaker, as their mother, as my wife." The words fell between them like a stone dropped in still water, sending ripples through Clara's very soul. She stared at him, unable to speak. This was the proposal she had once dreamed of: marriage, a home, children calling her their own. But the reality of it was far more terrifying than the dream. "Elias," she said finally, her throat tight, "do you even hear what you're asking of me? To step into Margaret's place? To take her children as mine? To stand at your side? When the town already believes the worst of me?" His gaze did not waver. "I'm not asking you to replace Margaret. No one could. I'm asking you to walk forward with us, me, Samuel, Rose, to give us a future we can't build alone." Clara's heart pounded. 1,000 doubts rushed through her. What if he wanted only a convenient solution, a woman to keep his household in order? What if she could never be enough for him? Or worse, what if she gave her heart completely only to be seen as a shadow of the wife he had lost? Her voice broke as she asked the question that burned deepest. "Do you want me, Elias? Or do you only need me?" The silence stretched long. The crackle of the fire was the only sound between them. Elias rose slowly, stepping closer, his tall frame casting her in shadow. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, but every word carried weight. "Need brought you here, Clara," he said. "But want keeps me asking you now. I want you. The children want you. And I think you want us too." Clara's eyes stung with tears. He had seen straight through her, the longing she had fought to bury, the love she had tried to deny. Yet still, fear held her back. She shook her head slightly, whispering, "This is unthinkable." Elias bent down, his eyes meeting hers, steady and unwavering. "Then think on it," he said gently. "But don't turn away from what's already here." And with that, he left her by the fire, her heart torn open, the unthinkable proposal echoing in her ears. The first days in the Turner household were a test of both patience and strength. Clara had not lived with others in many years. She was accustomed to her own quiet rhythm, her cottage where every object stayed in its place. The Turner ranch, by contrast, was alive with chaos. Samuel burst into rooms like a colt too restless for its pen. Rose trailed behind, softer, but no less demanding. Meals were messy affairs, crumbs scattered across the table, milk spilled without apology, chores left undone piled up in corners. And though Elias worked himself ragged from dawn until dusk, his tired silence filled the house almost as tangibly as the dust on the windowsills. Clara felt like a seamstress, trying to mend a garment already torn in too many places. But she also saw the threads she could use. She began with the children. Rose, shy and watchful, needed gentleness. Clara braided her hair each morning, humming softly, and within days the little girl had taken to following her everywhere, her small hand clinging tightly to Clara's apron. Samuel was harder, rebellious, stung by grief, often quick to sulk or argue. Clara learned to temper firmness with patience, guiding him to tasks that gave him purpose. She taught him to measure flour for biscuits, to tend a small patch of garden, to read the simpler verses from her worn Bible, bit by bit. He softened one evening as she stirred stew over the fire. She caught Samuel whispering to Rose, "Feels like we've got Ma back." The words pierced Clara to her very core. She turned away quickly, pretending not to hear, but tears welled hot in her eyes. She was not their mother, could never be their mother. Yet, hearing that longing in Samuel's voice, she understood how deep their need ran, and how dangerous it was to step into that place. Still, joy came unexpectedly. The children's laughter filled corners of the house that had lain silent since Margaret's passing. Clara found herself smiling more, her heart softening as she tucked Rose into bed or praised Samuel for a chore well done. At night she no longer returned to a lonely cottage, but sat near the fire with Elias and the children, mending clothes while Elias read from an old almanac or shared news of the cattle. But just as laughter returned, so did the shadows. Clara and Elias clashed. Often their differences sharp. Elias was a man of habit, used to giving orders that were obeyed without question. Clara, on the other hand, had built her life on independence. She did not hesitate to correct him when his tone was too harsh with the children, nor did she stay. Silent when he resisted small changes, she introduced to the household. "You're coddling Samuel," Elias said one evening after she stepped in to calm the boy's temper. "A boy needs firmness. He won't grow strong if we soothe him every time he stomps his feet." Clara, tired from a day of endless tasks, snapped back before she could temper her words. "And what strength do you think grief has left him with, Elias? He's 8 years old, his mother is gone. You may think he needs only discipline, but what he truly needs is comfort." The room had gone quiet after that. Samuel had overheard them, his face pale, his shoulders hunched. Clara regretted the harshness in her voice. Yet she could not deny the truth of her words. Such quarrels passed, but they left marks like faint scars after a wound has closed. Clara knew Elias carried his grief differently. His answer to loss was endurance, work, and silence. Hers was tenderness, even when it hurt. Between them stretched that divide, and sometimes she wondered if it could ever truly be bridged, yet there were moments when she saw something shift in him. One night, after the children were asleep, Elias lingered by the hearth, his eyes fixed on the flames. Without looking at her, he murmured, "They're laughing again." I'd nearly forgotten what that sounded like. Clara's sewing needle paused in her hand. She turned toward him, catching the quiet gratitude in his voice. It was not a declaration, not even a smile, but it was something, a thread of connection between two hearts learning, awkwardly, to share the same space. And though doubts still gnawed at Clara about gossip, about her place, about the risk of her own heart, she could not deny it. The Turner Ranch, once filled with silence, was beginning to sound like a home again. Life on the Turner Ranch settled into a rhythm, but it was not a smooth one. Clara and Elias worked side by side for the children's sake, yet their differences flared often like flint and steel striking sparks. Elias was a man of order, a rancher shaped by the land. To him, rules were firm, discipline was steady, and emotions, when they came, were best tucked away. Clara, however, had built her life on compassion. She had seen too many women labor in fear, too many infants clinging to life, to believe that strength was found in silence. To her, gentleness was not weakness, it was the very thing that held people together. Their opposing natures collided. Almost daily. One evening, Clara called Samuel inside after dusk, where he sulked and muttered about unfinished play. Elias, weary from a day of branding cattle, looked up sharply. "Don't let him speak to you that way," he warned. "A boy needs to learn respect." "He's tired, Elias," Clara replied evenly, laying a hand on Samuel's shoulder. "He misses his mother. Let him have space to feel it." "Space?" Elias's jaw tightened. "What he needs is backbone." "If I'd spoken that way to my father, I'd have felt the switch across my back." Clara's eyes flashed. "And did that make you kinder or only quieter?" The words hung heavy in the room. Samuel stared at the floor, torn between fear of his father and comfort in Clara's hand. Elias turned away, his shoulders stiff, but he did not answer. That night they ate supper in silence, the children sensing the storm between them. Another time, Clara introduced little lessons at the table: letters for Rose, simple arithmetic for Samuel. She believed structure would give them confidence, something to hold on to beyond the grief that had hollowed them. Elias, however, frowned at the slate and chalk she had brought into the kitchen. "They're ranch children," he said gruffly. "They'll learn their letters when there's time. What they need to know is work how to mend a fence, tend cattle, keep the land alive. That's what'll feed them when they're grown," Clara bristled. "Education doesn't weaken a child, Elias. It gives them choices. Don't you want your children to have more than endless toil?" His gaze hardened. "The land is enough. It always has been." Clara bit back her retort, but inside her heart burned. For all his devotion to his children, Elias sometimes seemed blind to the world beyond the ranch, blind to the possibilities that might give Samuel and Rose brighter futures. Yet for every clash, there were also quieter moments, unexpected glimpses. That unsettled her just as much as the arguments. One afternoon, Clara found Elias mending Rose's doll by lamplight, his large, calloused fingers working clumsily with needle and thread. Rose had fallen asleep, tearful that her beloved toy had split at the seams. Elias, grumbling under his breath, refused to let her wake to disappointment. Clara watched from the doorway, hidden, her heart softening at the sight of his tenderness. On another evening, when a storm rattled the windows and the children huddled close, Elias drew them into his lap and told them a story one Margaret used to tell. His voice, low and rough, carried through the room like a lullaby. Clara, listening as she mended clothes by the fire, felt something she had not expected, a yearning not only for the children, but for the man who loved them so fiercely. Even in his brokenness, still, their stubbornness often clashed more than their tenderness bound them. At times, Clara questioned whether she had made a mistake stepping into this home. Perhaps the town was right to whisper. Perhaps she was a trespasser in another woman's place, destined to bring more discord than peace. But then Rose would curl into her lap, thumb in her mouth, whispering, "Stay, Miss Clara, don't go." And Samuel would slip his small hand into hers when he thought no one noticed. Those moments silenced her doubts for a while. What Clara did not yet realize was that these tensions were not tearing the household apart. They were shaping it as fire tempers iron. Each clash forced Elias to see the cracks in his silence, and forced Clara to confront her own guarded heart. They were two wounded souls learning, however reluctantly, to bend toward one another. And, though neither would admit it aloud, something stronger than conflict was beginning to grow between them. The first time Clara saw Elias Turner up close, he looked as if the weight of the entire prairie rested on his shoulders. She had seen him from afar before. Everyone in Willow Creek knew the Turner Ranch, a sprawl of fenced pastureland, weathered barns and cattle that grazed under the wide Montana sky. Elias had once been the picture of strength, broad-shouldered, sun-darkened skin, a quiet presence that turned heads without effort. He and his wife, Margaret, had built the ranch together, raising 2 children while the land prospered under his hands. But since Margaret's sudden death the previous winter and illness that swept through town and left too, many families grieving Elias was not the man he once had been. His shoulders sagged, his voice rarely carried, and though he went about his work with the same relentless discipline, There was a hollowness to him now, like a door that would never open again. Rumors spread, as they always did. Some said he drank himself into stupors on lonely nights. Others said he was a man so hardened by loss he barely spoke to his children. Clara dismissed most of it as gossip, but when she finally looked into his eyes one late afternoon, she saw enough to know at least part of it was true. He came to her door that day, the sun low in the sky, hat in hand, boots dusted from the trail. Clara was preparing her supper, a simple bowl of soup and bread, when the knock startled her. Opening the door, she found Elias standing there, his figure filling her small threshold. "Miss Clara," he said, his deep voice carrying a rough edge as if unused to words. I need your help." At first, she thought one of the neighbors' wives had gone into labor. It was the only reason people came to her in such a way. She reached instinctively for her satchel of instruments. "Who's birthing?" "She," asked, but Elias shook his head. His weathered face held no trace of joy or expectation, only exhaustion. "Not a birthing. It's my children." Clara paused, her brow furrowing. She had delivered both of Elias's little ones, Samuel, now 8, and Rose, just 5. She remembered Margaret's radiant smile after each birth, the tenderness with which she had held her babies. The memory pricked Clara's chest with an ache she quickly hid. "They're healthy, aren't they?" she asked. "Yes," Elias admitted, running a hand over his jaw. "Healthy, but they've lost their mother. And He stopped, eyes lowering to the dirt at his boots. For a man who could wrangle cattle, repair fences, and drive a herd through storms, admitting weakness was no small thing. Clara studied him, noting the lines etched deeper into his face, the hollows beneath his eyes. "You're asking for—" "What, exactly?" Elias hesitated, his voice thickening. "I can tend the ranch, Miss Clara, but I can't be both father and mother. Samuel's restless, Rose cries at night. I don't know how to comfort her. I don't know—" His words faltered. "I don't know how to raise them without Margaret." The silence between them stretched long, filled only by the distant sound of a meadowlark. Clara's breath caught as she began to understand. He wasn't here for her midwife's hands. He was here for something else entirely. "You want me to—" she began softly. "Help raise them," Elias finished. His eyes lifted, steady and desperate at once. "They need someone with a gentle hand. Someone who knows children, and the truth is, I can't do it alone." Clara's heart twisted. The request was unthinkable, not because it was offensive, but because it touched the very wound she guarded so fiercely. To mother children, even borrowed ones. It was both the fulfillment of her deepest longing and the risk of breaking. Her heart beyond repair. She searched his face. There was no arrogance there, no assumption, only a man stripped bare of pride, willing to humble himself for the sake of his children. For the first time in many years, Clara did not know how to answer. She gripped the edge of her door, her pulse quickening. "Elias Turner," she whispered, more to herself than to him. "You don't know what you're asking," but he did know. "And still," he asked. The night after Elias came to her door, Clara could barely sleep. She lay awake in her narrow bed, staring at the ceiling while the lantern's flame sputtered low on the table. His words circled in her mind like restless birds. "Help raise them." "I can't do it alone." For years, Clara had accepted the shape of her life, her cottage at the edge of town, her work that carried her into others' homes, and her solitude when the work was done. It was not the life she had dreamed of, but it was one she had learned to endure. Elias's request, however, cracked that hard-won stillness wide open. To step into his household would mean stepping into a world she had only ever touched from the outside. It would mean laughter around the breakfast table, little feet scurrying across floorboards, a child's hand slipping into hers. It would mean family, but it would also mean risk. The town already whispered about her. What would they say if she moved into a widower's home? Would they sneer that she was trying to replace Margaret? That she had finally found a back door into motherhood? Worse still, what if she grew to love those children as her own, only to lose them if Elias remarried, or if she discovered that he had never wanted her there as anything more than convenience? Her heart warred with itself until The first light of dawn crept through her window. By then, her mind was no clearer than it had been at sunset the following afternoon. Clara found herself standing before the Turner ranch. She had told herself she was only checking in, only seeing the children. But her feet had carried her up. The long dirt path, through the wooden gate and across the yard where chickens pecked in the dust. Samuel was the first to see her. The boy came charging around the corner of the barn, his hair tousled, his face streaked with dirt. "Miss Clara!" he shouted, throwing his arms around her waist. Clara's breath caught as she steadied herself, her hands instinctively smoothing his hair. She remembered delivering him into this world, Margaret's cries ringing in her ears. Elias pacing outside the door until she called him in. Rose followed more slowly, clinging to a rag doll, her big eyes solemn as she studied Clara. Then, as if deciding, the little girl reached out and slipped her small hand into Clara's. That simple gesture nearly undid her. Inside the house, she saw the truth of Elias's struggle. The kitchen table was cluttered with half-finished meals. A basket of laundry slumped in the corner. Rose's braid was loose, and Samuel's knees bore scrapes left untended. The house that once rang with Margaret's warmth now carried only silence, broken by the children's restless voices. Elias stood in the doorway, watching her take it in. He did not apologize for the disarray. He only nodded once, as though acknowledging that she now saw with her own eyes what he had tried. "To explain, they need more than I can give," he said quietly. "I work sun up to sundown to keep the ranch from falling apart. By the time I come inside, I've nothing left for them but weariness. Margaret, she could hold the whole world together with her 2 hands, but I'm not her. And I can't pretend. I am." Clara turned to him, her throat tightening. "Elias, what you're asking, it isn't small. To mother children is no simple task. To step into a place that belonged to another woman." Her voice faltered. "It will stir tongues." "I don't care about tongues," Elias said firmly, his gaze steady. "Let them talk. Let them gossip until their throats are raw. My children need someone, and I've thought long and hard about who that someone could be. There's no one else I'd trust." The weight of his words pressed against her. He wasn't merely asking for help with chores or an occasional visit. He was asking her to step into the heart of his family, to fill a void left by death itself. Clara looked at Samuel, who had settled by the hearth, carving a stick with careful concentration, and at Rose, who now curled against her side, thumb in her mouth, eyelids drooping. A tenderness surged in her that she had tried to bury for years. She could give these children what they craved: a steady hand, a soothing voice, the security of a woman's care. But could she give it without losing herself? Without letting her long-buried longing consume her? At last, she drew a breath. "I can help, Elias," she said, her voice low but steady. "But understand this, I am not Margaret. I cannot replace her." Elias's expression softened, and for the first time since she had seen him, a flicker of relief touched his eyes. "I wouldn't ask you to. I only ask you to be yourself. That's enough." Clara lowered her gaze, her heart pounding. Enough. The word echoed inside her, fragile and dangerous. Could it be true? The people of Willow Creek spoke Clara's name with respect. If a woman's labor stretched on too long, if the cries of exhaustion echoed through the clapboard houses on the prairie, it was Clara the family sent for. She came at all hours sometimes. In the dead of night, lanterns swinging at her side, sometimes at dawn, just as the roosters crowed. Her hands were steady, her voice calm, and more often than not, a newborn's first wail filled the air because of her. Clara had delivered over 60 children in her 10 years of service to the town. She had coaxed life into infants born too small, steadied mothers who feared they could not survive the pain, and earned the trust of men who placed their wives' lives into her keeping. To all outward eyes, she was the symbol of strength and care, a woman who seemed almost chosen for her sacred role. And yet, when the babies were placed in their mother's arms, when fathers cried with joy, when neighbors cheered outside the door of a safe delivery, Clara always slipped quietly away. She never lingered to hold the infant or bask in the family's happiness. She would pack her instruments, wash her hands, and disappear into the night, back to her lonely cottage at the edge of town. There, in the quiet, grief waited for her. Clara could not bear children of her own. The truth was known only to her late mother and to the doctor, who had spoken the words that changed her life when she was just 20. Your body was not made to carry life. At first, Clara had not believed him. She had hoped, prayed, even imagined that the doctor was wrong. But the years passed, and though she was courted once or twice, she had turned each suitor away. What man, she asked herself, would want a wife? Who could never give him children? In Willow Creek, motherhood was more than expectation, it was a woman's legacy. Girls were raised to believe their greatest pride would be in carrying their husband's name forward through children. Clara's gift of delivering babies should have made her beloved. Instead, it marked her with cruel irony. The whispers followed her wherever she went. She's skilled, yes, but isn't it strange? A midwife who can't have her own. What? Sort of God would grant her the talent to help others but deny her children of her own? Maybe that's why she's always alone. The words stung, though Clara never let them see it. She held her head high, her calmness never breaking. Yet each whisper was another weight pressing against her ribs. She delivered children into the arms of women who sometimes mocked her in secret. She wiped the brows of mothers who would later turn their eyes away in the marketplace, ashamed of what they had whispered behind her back. And when night fell, when the silence of her cottage grew too heavy, Clara would press her hand against her belly and wonder what it would feel like to carry life inside her. She imagined the flutter of movement, the rounded swell beneath her palm, the pain of labor that she had witnessed so many times, but that she would never endure, the ache. Was her companion as faithful as her own shadow? Yet Clara never abandoned her work. If anything, she gave herself to it more fiercely. If she could not be a mother herself, she reasoned, then she would make certain no other woman in Willow Creek faced the terror of childbirth alone. Her gift, her curse, was that she could give to others what was forever denied her. Some nights, after returning from a delivery, she would sit at her small wooden table and write the names of the babies she had brought into the world. She kept the list folded in her apron pocket, a secret record of the lives she had touched. In her darkest moments, she would take out the worn paper, run her fingers over the names, and remind herself, I have no children of my own, but perhaps in some small way these children are mine too. Still, no list, no whispered prayer, no. Quiet pride could fully fill the hollow place inside her. Clara lived with her grief in silence, carrying it as a woman carries chains unseen by others, but unbearably heavy. And so, while the people of Willow Creek called her the midwife, to Clara, the title carried a different meaning. It was not just her calling. It was the reminder of everything she could never be. The people of Willow Creek relied on Clara, but reliance was not the same as kindness. Respect for her skill did not shield her from the sharper edge of small-town judgment. On Sunday mornings, she took her usual place at the back pew of the whitewashed church, hands folded neatly in her lap, bonnet tied just so. The preacher often gave thanks for her service, for the angel among us who guards the birthing bed. At those words, the congregation would murmur their approval, some even turning their heads to glance at her. Clara always lowered her gaze, her cheeks heating. But not all the glances were warm. Sometimes a woman's eyes lingered on her with pity. Other times, with mockery barely hidden behind a polite smile. Clara felt the weight of those looks more keenly than the preacher's praise. After the service, as neighbors milled outside, she would hear them in passing. A group of young wives, clustered together in their bright dresses, whispering behind lace fans, "It's strange, isn't it? Delivering all those babies but never holding one of her own?" A husband would have given her a reason to stay home, instead of meddling in everyone else's household. Maybe no man wanted her because he knew. The words were sharp as glass. Clara kept walking, her step steady, her smile polite, never betraying that the whispers pierced straight to her heart. To acknowledge them would be to give them power. Instead, she clutched her Bible a little tighter and told herself that her strength came from silence, but silence did not erase loneliness. At the market, when she paused to buy flour or sugar, she saw mothers with their children tugging at their skirts little ones who grinned up at her, calling, "Miss Clara." They loved her, and she returned their affection with genuine warmth, kneeling to pinch their cheeks or braid a stray lock of hair. But when the mothers gathered together to chat, Clara often found herself standing on the edges, listening but not invited in. They spoke of swollen ankles, of babies teething, of sleepless nights. Conversations Clara could never join without being reminded of what she lacked. There were cruelties that cut deeper still. Once, after delivering her neighbor's third child, Clara stayed through the night to ensure mother and infant rested well. As dawn light filled the cabin, the father took her hand, thanking her through tears. But when Clara excused herself, stepping outside to make her way home, she heard the mother whisper to her sister, "She's good at her work, yes. But tell me, what sort of woman spends her whole life with babies that aren't hers? It isn't natural." Clara froze. She did not wait to hear more. She hurried down the dirt path, her jaw clenched, her heart aching with a familiar heaviness. She would never confront them. What good would it do? Words would not change their hearts. And so, the town's cruel judgment became like the wind always there, sometimes soft, sometimes cutting, but inescapable. At night in her cottage, Clara tried to tell herself she was stronger than their gossip. She lit a candle, opened her worn journal, and wrote down her thoughts in tidy lines, as if setting them on paper could lighten the weight. She reminded herself that her worth was in the lives she saved, in the children she coaxed into this world, in the families that flourished because of her. But even as she wrote those words, the truth crept in. Being needed was not the same as being loved. Her work had given her a place in the town, but not a place in its heart. She was an outsider looking in, a caretaker rather than a participant. Others saw her as useful, yes, but also strange, incomplete, a woman missing the very thing that defined womanhood in their eyes. Still, Clara endured. Each cruel word, each dismissive glance, she bore like another stone added to her load. And yet she kept walking, kept delivering, kept smiling with a dignity that no whisper could steal. But deep inside, in the quietest corner of her heart, she could not help but wonder, would she always be the woman they pitied, respected and gossiped about but never truly welcomed? The answer seemed fixed, Unceangable, until the day Elias Turner, the widow rancher, came to her door.